The day she first saw him, the sun seemed tired of shining. The market roared with the cries of sellers and the scent of sweat and roasted corn, yet her eyes found only him. The beggar by the cracked fountain, speaking softly to the wind as if the air itself remembered his name. His clothes were torn, his beard tangled, but there was a strange majesty in his silence, the kind that did not beg for pity, only for recognition. And though everyone else passed him by with laughter or disgust, Amira stopped, because something in his loneliness felt like a mirror of her own. Lagos breathed around her, restless and unkind, a city that devoured the weak and crowned the shameless. But Amira had learned to survive its teeth. Every dawn, she balanced her tray of fried plantains on her head, her bare feet whispering across the hot concrete as she fought to sell enough to pay rent, feed herself, and send coins to her ailing father upcountry. Life had given her no mercy, yet she carried mercy in her eyes. Perhaps that was why she noticed the man no one else did. Each evening, when the market began to fade and the shadows grew long, she would see him sitting at the same spot, back straight, eyes far away, humming melodies that belonged to another lifetime. His name, whispered by street children who mocked him, was Toby, though they added other names too. Madman, Cursed One, Ghost Prince. Yet when he spoke, it was not madness that came out, but words layered with history, pain, and something that felt like prophecy. The first time she offered him food, he didn't take it. He simply looked at her, his gaze sharp enough to pierce through her guarded calm. "You shouldn't waste kindness here," he murmured. "This city eats kindness for breakfast." Amira smiled, half defiant, then let it choke. He studied her, as though trying to remember something from a forgotten dream, and then nodded faintly, accepting the food with hands that trembled slightly. Not from hunger, but from restraint. She realized then that he wasn't used to being treated like a human being. Days turned into weeks, and her routine became incomplete without him. While others laughed at her foolishness, Amira returned to the fountain again and again, drawn not by pity, but by a curiosity she couldn't name. There was mystery in the way he spoke of the world, of kingdoms and betrayal, of storms and stars, as if he had once stood where kings had fallen. His words carried too much knowledge for a man in rags, and sometimes, when he thought she wasn't watching, his posture would straighten, his gaze sharpen, and the beggar would vanish, replaced by someone regal and haunted. But when she asked about his past, he would only smile, eyes distant. "Some truths," he said. "Sleep better under dust." Still she stayed. In the midst of Lagos's noise, they built a fragile world of quiet. Two outcasts sharing bread and unspoken grief. Amira found herself telling him things she had never told anyone. Her dreams of studying nursing, her fears of dying poor and unseen, her hatred of the way wealth walked past suffering as if it were invisible. He listened without judgment, and in his silence, she found peace. One evening, the sky bled into gold and crimson as thunderclouds gathered on the horizon. The air grew thick, heavy with the promise of rain. Amira was packing up her stall when she saw Toby still sitting by the fountain, staring into the distance like a man waiting for judgment. She hesitated, then crossed to him with a parcel of food wrapped carefully in cloth. "You'll get soaked," she said softly. "Come take shelter by the stalls." He didn't move. "I've lived in storms longer than this," he murmured, eyes still fixed on the horizon. Amira sat beside him despite the wind tugging at her scarf. "And survived them all, I suppose." He turned then, his gaze locking with hers, deep, dark, and endless. "Survival," he said slowly, "isn't always a blessing." A shiver crawled through her spine. The first drops of rain fell, cool against her skin, and she noticed the faint scar running across his wrist, half hidden by dirt. It was old, deliberate, and shaped like a royal crest, a crown divided by flame. She wanted to ask about it, but his expression told her not to. Instead, they sat in silence as the rain began to fall harder, drumming against the fountain like 1,000 heartbeats. Lightning split the sky, illuminating his face for a fleeting second. And in that flash, he no longer looked poor. He looked powerful, dangerous, and heartbreakingly lost. The rain became a curtain between them and the rest of the world. Amira's heart pounded, torn between fear and fascination. She didn't understand why she cared for this man, why his sadness felt heavier than her own, or why his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen kingdoms fall. All she knew was that she wanted to see him again, no matter how foolish that desire was. When the storm finally began to fade, she rose to leave. "I'll bring bread tomorrow," she said quietly, "and maybe you'll tell me what storm you're still fighting." He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on something behind her, something she couldn't see. She followed his gaze but found only darkness. Turning back, she saw that strange half-smile again, as if he knew something she didn't. As she took a step away, his voice followed her through the sound of falling rain, low, calm, and chillingly certain. "You'll see me again," he said, "but not like this." She froze, her breath caught halfway between disbelief and fear. When she turned back, the space by the fountain was empty. Only the echo of his words remained, and beneath it, glinting faintly in the lamplight, lay a single golden coin engraved with a royal crest half buried in the wet earth. Some truths don't hide. They wait, disguised as madness, whispering through cracked voices until the brave dare to listen. Since the night Toby vanished into the storm, Amira hadn't known peace. Sleep escaped her, haunted by the echo of his last words. "You'll see me again, but not like this." When she finally found him days later by the fountain, something in him had changed. The same man sat there in rags, yet the air around him felt heavier, charged with secrets too ancient for a beggar's tongue. His eyes no longer wandered. They watched, like those of someone who once commanded fear and obedience. The market buzzed as always, vendors shouting, laughter spilling through the evening air. But Amira heard none of it. She walked straight toward him, her heart tangled between relief and suspicion. "You disappeared," she whispered, her voice trembling more from emotion than anger. He looked up slowly, his expression calm, yet unreadable. "Sometimes disappearing is safer than being seen," he said, his words carrying the quiet authority of someone who had lived long enough to understand the cost of visibility. Amira sat beside him, placing her small bundle of bread on his lap. "You speak like a king who's lost his crown," she said, trying to smile, though her chest ached. He didn't answer, only gave her a faint glance that lingered too long to be meaningless. "And you speak like someone who doesn't know how dangerous truth can be," he replied softly. That night, something shifted between them. His words became deeper, his silences more deliberate. He began to speak of places she'd never heard of, cities across the sea, men in uniforms who bowed before no one but greed, and a betrayal that burned kingdoms to ash. His voice, though roughened by time, carried the rhythm of royalty. Even the way he paused between sentences felt rehearsed, regal, mournful. Amira listened like a child hearing stories forbidden to the world. "Who betrayed you?" she asked one evening, her curiosity trembling with fear. Toby smiled, not with joy, but with the bitterness of someone who had long stopped expecting justice. "A brother," he said quietly, "and a crown, too heavy for his head." Before she could question more, thunder rolled across the sky, breaking the fragile peace. From the corner of her eye, she noticed two men watching them, strangers dressed too well for this part of the city. The moment their eyes met hers, they turned away. A chill ran through her. "Who are they?" she asked, but Toby's face had already gone pale. "Trouble," he murmured, "the kind that doesn't forget faces." That night, danger came wrapped in rain. She was locking her stall when the sound of struggle reached her. Muffled shouts, a cry for mercy. She ran back toward the fountain and froze. 3 men surrounded Toby, kicking him, demanding something she couldn't hear. Then a word reached her ears. Pendant. Without thinking, she grabbed a broken broomstick and rushed forward, her scream cutting through the storm. "Leave him alone!" she shouted, swinging wildly. The men scattered, cursing, one slashing her shoulder before fleeing into the darkness. Breathless and trembling, Amira fell beside Toby, who lay bleeding, his coat torn, his eyes burning with something between gratitude and despair. She dragged him to her small room above the market, cleaned his wounds with shaking hands, and tried to steady her racing heart. "Why were they after you?" she whispered. "What pendant?" He said nothing, but as she pressed a wet cloth to his chest, her hand brushed against a cold metal chain beneath his shirt. She froze. "Toby, what's this?" He stiffened. "Don't," he said sharply, but she had already pulled it out. The pendant shimmered in the candlelight, gold engraved with a royal crest encircled by the words, Deo et Regi. Her breath caught. "This belongs to the royal house," she whispered. "Who are you?" His eyes lifted slowly, filled with torment and truth. "Someone who lost everything, trying to protect what should never have been touched," he said, voice breaking. "And now the past has found me again." Morning came quietly, but peace did not. Amira woke to the sound of engines rumbling outside, the street alive with whispers. Through the curtain, she saw them. Black cars lined like shadows, men in suits knocking on doors, flashing a single photograph. Her heart stopped when she recognized the face. Toby's, but dressed in royal robes, his eyes fierce beneath a crown. "Have you seen this man?" one of them asked her neighbor. "He's wanted. For treason." Amira turned back toward the bed, but it was empty. Toby was gone, the pendant lying on the table like a heartbeat in gold, and on the cracked wall above it, written in soot, were 5 words that made her blood run cold. Trust no one from home. When love chooses to bloom, it does not ask for timing or permission. It simply grows in the cracks where despair once lived. The night Amira dragged the wounded beggar into her tiny room, she did not yet know she was sheltering a fallen kingdom. Outside, thunder grumbled like an omen. Inside, 2 strangers breathed the same uncertain air, one carrying a lie too heavy to confess, the other clinging to a kindness that might soon destroy her. That night, beneath the trembling glow of a candle, destiny sat quietly between them, watching. Toby's body burned with fever, his chest rising and falling like a man at war with his own memories. Amira pressed a damp cloth against his forehead, whispering words she barely understood, prayers stitched from faith and fear. When he finally stirred, his eyes opened with the weariness of someone who had carried too many names. "Why did you bring me here?" he asked weakly. "Because leaving you there would have killed something in me," she replied, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "You're safe. Now." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides both gratitude and grief. "No one who knows me is safe." For a while they said nothing. The room smelled of boiled herbs and candle smoke, the window rattling each time the wind brushed against it. It was the kind of silence that made confessions inevitable. At last, he spoke again, softly, as if the truth might shatter if said too loud. "My name isn't Toby. It never was." Amira's breath caught. She turned to him slowly, her pulse quickening with something she couldn't name. "Then who are you?" "I was born Adetobi Adekunle," he said, the words falling like stones into the air. "First son of King Adewale of Ibadan, rightful heir to the Adekunle throne." His eyes drifted toward the flickering candle. "I was betrayed by the only brother I ever trusted. He staged a coup, took the crown, and painted my death with my father's blood. The people mourned me. The kingdom forgot me. And I became The revelation cracked something in the air. Not fear, but awe. Amira stared at him, torn between disbelief and the aching truth she had always felt but never dared to name. The way he spoke, the way he carried silence like a burden. Every piece now fit into a story too big for her small room. "You were a prince," she whispered. "I was," he replied bitterly. "Now I am only the ghost of one." For the next few days, her home became both a refuge and prison. She nursed him, fed him, listened as he spoke of a palace that had turned into a graveyard. She learned how loyalty could kill, how mercy could exile, and how love, even love of a nation, could demand you erase yourself. Each story drew them closer, until the space between breaths became the only distance left. When she laughed, he looked at her as though light itself had chosen to remember him. But love has never existed without a price. The world outside had begun to whisper. Vendors spoke of strangers asking questions, of a reward for information about a man with royal markings on his chest. At night, Amira found herself waking to every sound, the creak of the roof, the knock of the wind, afraid that one of them would be the moment her door broke open. Toby sensed her fear and tried to leave, but she stopped him with trembling hands. "If the world comes for you," she said, "then it comes for me too." Her courage broke something in him. For the first time, he wept, silently, like a man who had forgotten what tears felt like. For a brief moment, love became stronger than fate. But fate is patient and cruel. Cliffhanger. At dusk, while they shared a quiet meal, a soft sound interrupted their peace, the scrape of paper sliding under the door. Amira froze, her spoon suspended mid-air. She bent down slowly and picked up the envelope, its wax seal stamped with the royal crest, the gold ink glinting like an accusation. Across its front, written in red that bled into the paper, were the words, "We know he's alive." Her hands trembled as thunder rolled again outside. When she lifted her eyes, Toby was already standing, his face pale, his jaw clenched. And in that heavy silence, Amira realized that the love she had just begun to believe in was about to be tested by the crown itself. 4. The Night the Sky Burned. 600 words. Emotional, suspenseful, cinematic. Hook. The city slept in silence, but fate woke with fire. Long before dawn, the hum of engines rolled through the slums like thunder with purpose, and dogs began to bark, as if warning of an unseen storm. Amira woke to the sound of heavy boots and the bitter scent of smoke creeping through the cracks of her window. Outside, the night pulsed with dread. Shadows moved in military rhythm, torches flared, and whispers carried words no one dared to say aloud. Toby stood by the door, already knowing what she hadn't yet realized. The hunt had reached their street. "Pack nothing," he said, his voice a mix of urgency and defeat. "They're not searching for things. They're searching for me." Amira's heart hammered against her ribs. The royal envelope still lay hidden beneath the floorboard, its seal broken, its message burning in her mind. "Then we run," she whispered. He turned to her, eyes hollow, face pale from exhaustion and guilt. "You don't understand. If they find me, they'll kill anyone near me. You have to go." But Amira only shook her head, her voice trembling yet fierce. "If you burn, I burn too." The words left him breathless. For a heartbeat, silence filled the room, fragile and eternal. Then, without another word, he took her hand, and they slipped out through the back door into the labyrinth of alleys that had raised her, and would now decide whether she lived or died. The slums were alive with terror. Flames danced in the distance, their glow turning the night sky into a false dawn. Soldiers moved in formation, shouting orders, their rifles glinting beneath the firelight. People ran carrying whatever they could, a child, a pot, a single photograph. Each footstep a story of desperation. Amira and Toby moved like shadows, their breaths shallow, their palms slick with sweat and fear. The smell of burning wood and oil clung to the air, thick enough to taste. They ducked behind an abandoned stall as soldiers marched past. Toby's chest heaved, his wound reopened, dark stains spreading across his shirt. Amira tore a strip from her dress, pressing it against his side, her hands trembling. "We can rest when we reach the river," she said, though she wasn't sure the river still existed. The entire horizon shimmered red. He looked at her with something deeper than gratitude. "You should have left me," he whispered. She met his gaze, tears cutting through the soot on her cheeks. "Don't ask me to survive a world that kills the only good thing in it." The roar of an explosion shook the ground, sending debris raining from the rooftops. They stumbled forward, coughing through the dust, clutching each other as walls crumbled around them. Sparks filled the air like angry stars, and every sound, every scream, every crack of gunfire felt like the city itself crying out in pain. Somewhere beyond the chaos, a siren wailed. Not for rescue, but for ruin. They reached a narrow passageway leading toward the edge of the market where the alleys met the old river road. The flames followed, chasing them with relentless hunger. Toby's steps grew slower, his strength fading, but Amira refused to let go. "Almost there," she cried, pulling him through the smoke, her lungs burning, her vision blurring. The night roared behind them, the sky itself a canvas of orange and despair. Then came the sound that split the world, a detonation so violent it swallowed the air itself. Heat surged, light flashed, and the ground vanished beneath her feet. When Amira opened her eyes, the world was ash and silence. The alley she had run through was gone, replaced by a crater still glowing with embers. Her ears rang, her body shaking, her dress torn and blood-stained. She called his name once, then again, louder, desperate, but the only answer was the crackle of dying flames. All around her, pieces of the night fell like black snow, and there, where Toby had been standing moments ago, the earth smoked, empty. His pendant lay half buried in the rubble, the gold scorched, the crest melted, the chain still warm to the touch. Amira sank to her knees, clutching it to her chest, the sky above still burning as if mourning its lost prince. Time may soften pain, but it does not heal absence. It only teaches the heart how to live beside its shadow. In the years after the night the sky burned, Amira carried her grief like a scar under her skin, invisible to most, unhealed to her. The city rebuilt itself with steel and glass, but she remained standing amid the ruins of memory, waiting for a voice that no one else remembered. To others, she was simply the woman who fed the poor. To herself, she was a guardian of a promise whispered through fire. Each dawn began the same way. The clang of pots in the community kitchen, the scent of boiling rice, and the quiet hum of the street coming alive. Amira worked in a charity center that helped the homeless, the same kind of souls among whom Toby had once hidden. She moved through the lines of faces every day, her heart tightening with every familiar shadow. Every stranger she served carried a fragment of his memory, a tone in their voice, the curve of a jaw, the tilt of a smile that made her heart falter for half a breath. Then it would fade, and she would remind herself that hope, like hunger, never truly dies. It only changes shape. Her own reflection changed too. The years had placed silver threads in her hair, softened her eyes, and deepened the quiet strength in her posture. Yet she still wore the small gold pendant she had salvaged from the ashes that night. The royal crest scorched beyond recognition, but still warm with meaning. She never removed it, as if doing so would let time erase him completely. Every year, on the anniversary of the fire, she walked to the old fountain, now dry and forgotten, a relic buried under the noise of progress. She lit a candle, set it by the cracked stone edge, and whispered into the night, "If you still breathe, let the wind carry this light to you." The neighbors called it madness, her friends called it grief, But to Amira, it was prayer. Not for answers, but for presence. Seasons came and went. Years folded over each other like worn pages. Life moved forward, but her heart stayed turned backward, toward a promise that refused to die. Sometimes she dreamed of him, not as the beggar she once nursed, or the prince she later learned he was, but as the man who had looked at her beneath a sky of fire and said, "If you burn, I burn too." Still, she waited. She waited through storms, through laughter that wasn't hers, through every sunrise that failed to bring his shadow back to her doorstep. Then, on the 7th anniversary, as the sun dipped below the skyline and the world turned gold, Amira returned once more to the old fountain. The street was empty, the air still, the sky bruised with twilight. She bent to place her candle on the edge, and froze. A single red rose lay there, fresh, trembling in the evening breeze. Beneath it, a folded note, edges clean and ink still wet. Her breath caught as she opened it, hands trembling. The words were few, written in the same slanted hand she had once seen on a letter long ago. "I kept my promise." The candle fell from her fingers, its flame flickering beside the rose, and in that trembling light, she felt the heartbeat of a love the world thought was lost forever. The beggar the world mocked had risen, not from luck, but from the memory of the woman who once saw his worth beneath the dust. The morning after Amira found the rose, the city awoke to a story that burned brighter than any dawn. Television screens, radios, and billboards carried one name: Tobias Adekunle, the lost heir to the Adekunle dynasty, a man once presumed dead and now reborn as the continent's most powerful philanthropist. To the world, he was a miracle, a symbol of endurance and triumph. To Amira, he was a ghost returned in a golden crown. She stood in the crowded marketplace where she had once sold food, the same streets now flooded with noise and excitement. Vendors left their stalls to gather around small televisions displayed in shop windows, the images flickering with disbelief. The reporter's voice trembled with awe as she narrated his journey. Years after the Adekunle coup that left the royal family shattered, the rightful heir, Tobias Adekunle, has resurfaced. His survival, once deemed impossible, is now being hailed as divine providence. The screen showed him stepping out of a black car, tall, composed, dressed in a tailored suit that reflected the morning light. The scars she remembered were gone. His eyes, once filled with loss, now carried the calm of someone who had seen the world's cruelty and mastered it. Behind him, cameras flashed like 1,000 burning stars, and the crowd roared his name. For a moment, Amira forgot to breathe. Her mind split between the man on the screen and the one who had once sat by her window, laughing softly over a bowl of rice, promising her a future without fear. Her knees weakened, her hands trembling against the fabric of her worn dress. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking into disbelief. "It can't be." But it was. The smile that reached his lips when he greeted the journalists. It was the same one that used to break through soot and sadness, the same one that made her believe love could rebuild anything. She sank into a nearby chair, her heart pounding with joy and ache in equal measure. The news continued. Mr. Adekunle plans to reopen his family's foundation, focusing on housing and health care for the poor. In his words, "We must never forget where we come from, no matter how far we rise." Tears blurred her vision. For the first time in years, she felt the world tilt back toward light. He had survived. He had become everything he was born to be. The world called him a savior, but Amira knew the truth. He had once been a man saved by love, not destiny. And yet, as the broadcast shifted to footage of glittering galas and royal receptions, something inside her began to twist. He looked different, colder, distant, almost untouchable. The fire of purpose that once burned in his eyes was still there, but it flickered behind glass now, protected, polished, contained. That night, she sat before the dim glow of her old television, the air thick with silence. The image froze on his face. Regal, smiling, unreachable. Her fingers brushed the screen, tracing the curve of his jaw as though touch could collapse the distance years had built between them. "You found your crown, Toby," she whispered, her voice trembling with both pride and pain. "But did you forget your heart?" The power flickered. His image vanished, leaving only her reflection in the dark glass. A woman who had loved a beggar and was now haunted by a king. Sometimes destiny knocks with gold, but the heart remembers the sound of wood. It had been weeks since the world rediscovered its lost prince, yet Amira still lived quietly on the edges of his empire, unseen, unheard, and unwilling to disturb the balance of fate. But on a morning brushed with soft rain and sun, a sound at her door changed everything. The knock was gentle but certain, followed by the rustle of paper and the fading echo of footsteps. When she opened it, the street was empty, except for a single gilded envelope resting on her doorstep, glinting like a secret, too heavy for daylight. Her name was written in elegant cursive across the gold surface, Miss Amira Hassan. Beneath it, the royal crest she thought she'd never see again shimmered faintly. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside, embossed in silver ink, were words she read twice before believing. "The Royal House of Adekunle cordially invites you to the Rebirth Gala, hosted by His Highness, Prince Tobias Adekunle." The room spun around her. The note slipped from her hands and landed softly on the floor. The very world that had once burned her hopes to ashes was calling her back, not as a servant, not as an outcast, but as a guest. Still, her heart whispered the question her pride dared not voice. Why her? That night she dressed in the only gown she owned, a simple blue fabric that had once belonged to her mother. It wasn't elegant, but it carried dignity. She pinned her hair, wiped the tears she didn't remember shedding, and stepped into a world that had forgotten her name. The royal hall shimmered under crystal chandeliers, every surface gilded, every face painted with wealth. Music swelled from the orchestra, laughter rippled like silk, and golden light danced across diamonds and champagne. But as Amira entered, the room shifted. Conversations paused. Curious eyes followed her, whispers trailing like smoke. Who is she? She doesn't belong here. Why would the prince invite her? Her pulse raced, but she kept walking, each step heavy with memory. She found a quiet corner near the marble pillars where she could breathe without drowning in eyes. Across the room, a portrait of Prince Tobias hung above the stage. Regal, powerful, almost unrecognizable from the man who once shared bread by a broken fountain. Then the music softened, and the crowd turned toward the stage as he appeared. Dressed in a black royal suit embroidered with silver threads, he carried himself like time had bent to his will. Cameras flashed, and applause filled the air. But as he began to speak, about love, about loss, about second chances, his voice carried something raw, something almost human beneath the grandeur. In the middle of his speech he looked up, and their eyes met. For a heartbeat, the hall vanished. The crowd blurred, the lights dimmed, and the world stood still. His words faltered, the microphone slipping slightly from his hand as silence rippled through the audience. Every gaze turned to follow his, but he saw no one else. The beggar's eyes met the woman who had once fed him from her hands. And in that single glance, kingdoms trembled with the weight of love remembered. When destiny reunites lovers, time itself kneels. In that vast royal hall, beneath the chandeliers that glittered like frozen stars, two souls who had been separated by years of pain found each other again, not through words, but through silence, heavy enough to stop the world. The crowd saw only a prince pausing mid-speech, but Amira saw the boy she once sheltered from storms, the man who had once whispered that love was the only crown worth wearing. He descended from the stage slowly, each step measured, the air between them trembling with memory. The cameras followed, flashing like lightning against the walls, but neither of them blinked. The murmurs of the elite grew into a storm of confusion and awe. Then, before the world that had mocked his fall and worshipped his return, Tobias Adekunle, once a beggar in the streets, took Amira's hand and raised it to his lips. "When I was no one," he said, his voice breaking softly through the microphone, "she saw me." For a moment, the entire hall forgot to breathe. Then came the sound of applause, hesitant at first, then roaring, unstoppable, crashing like the sea. Some wept openly, some clutched their chests, and others recorded every second, hungry for the fairy tale they'd just witnessed. But to Amira, none of it mattered. The cameras, the jewels, the flashing lights. They were ghosts compared to the warmth of his voice and the tremor in his hand. He turned to the crowd again, eyes glistening with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "This woman," he continued, "fed me when I had nothing, believed in me when I had no name, and stood by me when the world had turned its back. I owe her not just gratitude, but everything I have become." The orchestra began to play, violins swelling with the kind of melody that turns truth into legend. Tears blurred Amira's vision as applause thundered around them. Even those who had come to gossip now clapped with trembling hands. For a moment, it seemed the world itself was rewriting their story, from tragedy to triumph, from ashes to grace. But fate, as always, does not like unfinished debts. Hidden behind the velvet curtains of the upper balcony, another pair of eyes watched the scene, eyes dark with resentment, envy sharpened into hatred. Minister Adekunle, Tobias's stepbrother and the man who once orchestrated his exile, stood rigid among the shadows. His empire of deceit had survived many storms, but this one moment, this single reunion, threatened to undo it all. The sight of Tobias standing proud beside Amira was more than he could bear. His jaw clenched, his fingers curled around a concealed earpiece as he whispered into the silence, "End it, before he speaks again." As the orchestra reached its crescendo and the applause shook the marble floors, something metallic glinted high above the stage. A faint click echoed through the rafters, too soft for the crowd to notice, but loud enough for Destiny to hear. Tobias turned his head slightly, his smile still gentle, his hand still holding Amira's. Then, in the blinding shimmer of light, a bullet caught the glow of the chandelier, its silver edge cutting through the air, aimed straight for the heart of the prince. Love's truest form is not spoken. It bleeds. The shot that silenced a kingdom began as a whisper in the rafters, a glint of silver slicing through chandeliers and applause. For a single eternal heartbeat, no one moved. And then, instinct, wild, fearless, and born of love, took shape in a woman's body. Before the sound reached the walls, Amira was already moving. Her hands, once used to serve and to heal, now reached out to protect. The bullet tore through the air, and she threw herself in front of Toby, her body colliding with his just as the shot found flesh. The world shattered in one deafening sound. The music stopped. The chandeliers trembled. Gasps turned into screams as she fell into his arms, her breath catching in his chest like a broken melody. Blood bloomed through the fabric of her dress, dark, spreading, merciless, and her fingers, shaking, reached for his face. "Amira!" Toby's voice cracked into the microphone, raw and terrified. The crowd froze, their cheers now echoes of horror. Security swarmed the stage, shouting orders, pulling him back, but he refused to let go. "Stay with me," he begged, his voice trembling with a pain the cameras could not record. "Please, stay." Her lips moved, faintly, as if the air itself had become too heavy to breathe. "Now you know what forever means," she whispered, her voice breaking, but her eyes full of peace. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a promise, carried on the breath between worlds. He pressed his hand over the wound, desperate, his fingers stained red with the life that once made his world beautiful. "Help!" he shouted, his voice echoing against marble and glass. Paramedics rushed forward, flashes of white coats and stretchers slicing through the chaos. The orchestra instruments lay scattered like fallen soldiers. Pearls rolled across the floor, like tiny tears. The cameras kept rolling, the same lenses that once filmed his triumph now capturing his undoing. Somewhere in the distance, his stepbrother was being dragged away by security, screaming orders that no one heard anymore. Power had lost its meaning. Crowns had lost their shine. Only love remained, bleeding, trembling, alive for one last heartbeat. They carried her through the crowd, the sirens already wailing outside. Toby followed, his hand never leaving hers, whispering prayers that sounded like confessions. "You saved me once from hunger," he said, his tears falling onto her hair. "And now you've saved me from myself." Her breathing slowed, her eyelids fluttered, and for a moment she smiled, the same quiet, patient smile that had once turned a beggar into a man again. In the Royal Hospital, white walls replaced chandeliers, and the hum of machines replaced applause. The nation held its breath as doctors worked behind glass. Toby stood outside, his hand pressed against the window, his eyes hollow with fear. Then, a single sound cut through the silence. The long, flat tone of the heart monitor. Her pulse had faded into eternity. The screen dimmed, and with it, the world forgot how to breathe. The morning after love dies, even kings forget how to breathe. Dawn broke over the palace not with sunlight, but with silence. A silence so thick it clung to every wall, every corridor, every breath. Outside, the flags hung low, draped in mourning. Inside, the halls smelled of candle wax and grief. The world had awakened to headlines that felt like eulogies. "The beggar's queen is dead." For the first time since his coronation, Prince Tobias didn't rise. He sat in the corner of his chamber, the same suit from the gala still clinging to him, its fabric stiff with blood and sorrow. The crown on the table caught the light, untouched, irrelevant. His meals went cold, his advisors whispered, but he heard nothing. His eyes, once sharp enough to command armies and gentle enough to calm storms, now stared at nothing, fixed somewhere between memory and madness. The doctors had tried to explain it gently. She fought bravely, but the wound was too deep. Their words had fallen like stones into his chest. He had not cried then. Kings are not supposed to. But when the palace lights dimmed and the echoes of her voice returned, he broke, quietly, completely, the sound of his heart shattering hidden behind locked doors. Days passed. The newspapers began printing poems instead of politics. Strangers left flowers by the palace gates. Across the city, murals of Amira bloomed overnight, her face painted on walls, her name sung in the streets. They called her the beggar's queen, the woman who loved without reason and died without regret. Mothers told their children her story before bed. Beggars lifted their hands to the sky, whispering her name like prayer. Inside, Tobias wandered through the palace halls, lost among memories. He paused by the window where they once watched the rain together, where she had said, "Even storms have mercy if you wait long enough." He remembered her laughter echoing through the garden, the way her voice turned fear into faith, and the warmth of her hand that could still his trembling soul. Every memory felt like a blade, disguised as comfort. He began writing a letter that night, a farewell not to the throne, but to the world. "They can have the crown," he wrote, his pen shaking, "but I cannot wear it without her. The kingdom needs light, and mine went with her." When he signed his name, the ink bled slightly, as though even the page was weeping. He stood before the mirror, crown in one hand, resignation speech in the other. The reflection staring back at him looked more like a ghost than a king. Outside, Thunder rolled, the same sound that had once carried her into his life. He turned toward the door, ready to face his people one last time. Then came the sound. Hurried footsteps, a door flung open, and a voice trembling with disbelief. "Your Majesty." The nurse's eyes glistened with tears and awe. "She's breathing again." The crown slipped from his hand and hit the marble floor with a hollow echo. For the first time in days, Tobias inhaled, sharp, stunned, alive, as the world outside erupted into prayer. When love rises from the grave, kingdoms kneel. The world had already begun writing her elegy, but heaven was not finished with her name. Weeks after the bullet and the burial that never was, Amira's eyes fluttered open beneath the soft glow of morning. The machines around her hummed like angels holding their breath. Her first exhale was fragile, trembling, but it was life. The nurse screamed for the doctors. The guards dropped their weapons in disbelief, and somewhere across the palace, Tobias fell to his knees as if the earth itself had given him back his soul. He ran through corridors barefoot, the marble floor cold beneath his feet, his heart outracing his own steps. When he reached her room, the doctors were still speaking in astonishment, but he heard none of it. His world was sitting upright, pale but breathing, her eyes soft and dazed. "Amira," he whispered, his voice cracking like sunlight breaking through clouds. She turned her head, her lips forming the faintest smile. "You still don't listen when I tell you to eat," she murmured weakly. He laughed, a sound soaked in tears, and took her hand, pressing it against his heart. "You came back," he said, trembling. "You came back to me." For days he stayed beside her bed, feeding her soup, reading her letters from the people who called her the Queen of the Forgotten. The world outside rejoiced as if faith itself had been proven. Crowds filled the streets with songs and flowers. The news called it the miracle of Lagos. But inside the palace, their reunion was quiet, sacred, untouched by spectacle. When she could finally walk again, Tobias led her to the royal garden where they had first promised to love without crowns or titles. The air smelled of jasmine and new beginnings. A single sunbeam filtered through the trees, falling across her face like a blessing. Tobias turned to her, holding something small, not gold, not jeweled, but a simple circlet made of woven silver and ivory. "You are my queen," he said softly, "not because the world demands it, but because my heart cannot live without it." He placed the crown upon her head, his hands trembling not with ceremony, but with devotion. There were no trumpets, no royal decree, only two souls standing in the quiet light, their love the only kingdom that mattered. She closed her eyes, whispering, "Then may I reign only in kindness." That night, the city celebrated their wedding. Lanterns floated into the sky like 1,000 promises. Music filled the air, and even the moon seemed to bow lower over the palace. The world called it the wedding of the century, but for them, it was simply the end of every goodbye they had ever said. Yet as the final song faded and the torches burned low, an old woman appeared at the palace gate. Her robes tattered, her eyes shining with a light too ancient to belong to mortals. She held a staff carved with strange symbols and spoke in a voice that trembled with prophecy. "The world saw you fall," she said, her gaze fixed on Amira and Tobias. "Now make them see you rise." The guards froze, the air shifted, and for the first time since her awakening, Amira felt destiny stirring once more. The same streets that once mocked them now sang their names. Lagos had never seen such a day. A city that once whispered with gossip now thundered with applause. The sky itself seemed to bend closer, heavy with clouds, as if heaven wanted a front-row seat. Every window, every rooftop, every heart leaned toward the palace gates where love was about to rewrite history. Banners of gold and ivory fluttered in the wind, carrying the royal insignia now intertwined with a single white lily, her flower, her symbol. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a resurrection. The woman who had once fed beggars now walked toward a throne, not draped in jewels, but in grace. Her gown was hand-woven from simple cotton, stitched by women from the orphan shelters she had founded. Around her neck hung no diamonds, only a single pendant engraved with the words her mother once told her: "Kindness never dies." As the palace bells rang, the city erupted in song. The poor stood beside the powerful, the forgotten beside the honored. For once there were no lines dividing them. Vendors handed out food to strangers. Children danced barefoot in puddles, and priests from every faith gathered under one banner of peace. Even the guards lowered their weapons, their eyes glistening, as Amira stepped out into the courtyard. Tobias stood at the altar, dressed not in royal robes, but in white, the color of forgiveness, of rebirth. His crown was plain, his smile trembling with disbelief. When their eyes met across the aisle, time seemed to pause, as if even destiny wished to honor the moment it had worked so hard to create. As she reached him, he took her hands, his voice breaking as he spoke. "When the world saw a beggar, you saw a man. When I had nothing, you gave me everything that mattered. Today, I return it, my name, my life, my throne. You are my queen before God, before man, before eternity itself." Tears glistened on her lashes, catching the faintest shimmer of light. "I never wanted your crown," she whispered, "only your heart. But if wearing it lets me serve your people, then I will wear it with humility." The high priest smiled and raised his hands. "Then let this union bind not just two souls, but a kingdom healed by love." The choir began to sing, not hymns of royalty, but songs of the streets, the same melodies that once drifted through alleys where Amira sold food and Toby hid from his past. As they exchanged vows, a soft drizzle began to fall. First a whisper, then a symphony. The same rain that had once witnessed their pain now blessed their joy. Guests looked up in awe, umbrellas forgotten, laughter spilling like music. And beneath that gentle storm, he leaned close, his voice trembling against her ear. "You stayed when I had nothing," he whispered. "Now the world will know you were always my everything." She smiled, her tears lost in the rain, her arms around the man she had once found in the gutter and raised to grace. The camera pulled back slowly, the city glowing beneath the silver storm, the palace crowned in light, and two silhouettes holding each other beneath heaven's open sky. The rain fell harder, not in sorrow, but in celebration, as love, once broken, finally reigned eternal. If this story touched your heart, imagine how many more are waiting to be heard. Hit subscribe and join our journey where love rises from ashes and kindness conquers kings. Drop a in the comments. Tell us what moment broke you the most. Your one share can remind someone tonight that love still wins.